Stay with me. Can you hear me?
It hurts.
I know. We have to move.
Subscribe, hit the bell, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.
Easy now. I know.
The autumn wind carried the scent of dying sage across the Montana territory as Josiah Mercer rode his chestnut mare along the creek bed, checking fence lines that seemed to stretch toward eternity. He was 34 years old, a man carved from loneliness and hard work. With hands calloused from rope and weather-worn skin that told stories of seasons spent under unforgiving skies. His ranch sat 12 miles from the nearest town, a distance he preferred because solitude had become his closest companion since losing his wife to fever 3 winters past. The mare nickered suddenly, her ears pricking forward toward a cluster of cottonwood trees near the water's edge. Josiah pulled the reins, his instincts sharpening as he noticed something dark against the golden grass, something that didn't belong to the natural landscape. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against dried leaves as he approached. What he found stopped his heart cold in his chest. A woman lay crumpled on the ground like a discarded rag doll, her dress torn and stained with blood that had dried to a rust color against the fabric. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, purple bruises painting her cheekbones and jaw. Her dark hair, matted with dirt and dried blood, spread around her head like a tragic halo. For one terrible moment, Josiah believed he was looking at a corpse. Then she whimpered. The sound was so faint, so fragile, that it might have been the wind itself if not for the slight movement of her cracked lips. Josiah dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he carefully pushed the hair from her damaged face. "Can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from days of speaking only to livestock. "Miss, I'm going to help you." Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of spring leaves, and in them Josiah saw terror so profound that it reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. She tried to move away from him, but her body refused to obey, managing only a pathetic crawling motion that tore something deep inside him. "Easy now," he said softly, gentling his voice the way he did with frightened animals. "I won't hurt you. I swear on my mother's grave, I won't hurt you." Those green eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the threat. Finding neither, she finally stopped struggling, her body going limp with exhaustion and surrender. Josiah removed his coat and wrapped it carefully around her shivering form. When he lifted her into his arms, she weighed almost nothing, and he could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her ruined dress. Whoever had done this hadn't just beaten her. They had starved her first. The ride back to his ranch took nearly an hour, and Josiah held her against his chest the entire way, feeling each shallow breath she took like a prayer answered. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring words he couldn't understand, sometimes crying silently with tears that traced clean paths through the dirt on her face. He carried her into his modest cabin and laid her on his own bed, then rode hard to town to fetch Doc Patterson. The elderly physician arrived 2 hours later, his face growing grimmer with each injury he catalogued. "Broken ribs, at least 3, he said quietly to Josiah in the next room. "Dislocated shoulder that's been reset poorly. Cuts and bruises too numerous to count. She's severely malnourished and dehydrated." He paused, cleaning his spectacles with a handkerchief. "She's been through hell, Josiah, the kind of hell no woman should survive. But she will survive." The question felt desperate, though Josiah couldn't explain why this stranger's fate mattered so much to him. "If she has the will to live," Doc Patterson replied. "That's something medicine can't provide." For 3 days, Josiah sat beside her bed, leaving only to tend to the most urgent needs of his livestock. He spooned broth into her mouth when she was conscious enough to swallow. He changed the bandages on her wounds with hands that had gentled wild horses and birthed difficult calves. He talked to her, telling her stories about the ranch, about the mountains that turned purple at sunset, about anything that might anchor her to the world of the living. On the 4th day, she finally spoke. "Hannah." Her voice was barely a whisper, damaged from screaming or perhaps from the hands that had clearly been around her throat. "My name is Hannah Whitmore." Josiah leaned closer, relief flooding through him at this sign of returning strength. "I'm Josiah Mercer. You're safe here, Hannah. I promise you that." She turned her face away, and he saw shame in the gesture. shame that had no right to exist in someone who was clearly a victim rather than a perpetrator. "You should have left me," she said. "I'm not worth the trouble I'll bring. I'll be the judge of what's worth trouble on my own land." He said it firmly, leaving no room for argument. The story came out in pieces over the following weeks as Hannah grew stronger. She had been a schoolteacher in Kansas City, educated and respectable, until she caught the eye of a wealthy man named Marcus Hawthorne. He had courted her with flowers and poetry and promises of a beautiful life. She had believed him, married him, and discovered too late that behind closed doors he was a monster. 2 years of marriage had been 2 years of walking on broken glass, of saying the wrong thing and paying for it. With bruises she learned to hide beneath high collars and long sleeves. When she finally gathered the courage to flee, Marcus had found her. He and 3 of his hired men had beaten her and left her in the wilderness to die, far from anyone who might hear her screams or come to her rescue. "The law won't help," she said, her voice flat with resignation. "Marcus owns judges and sheriffs. He has more money than God and no conscience to trouble his sleep. Coming here has put you in danger." Josiah's jaw tightened. "Let him come. This is my land, and any man who sets foot here meaning you harm will regret it." Hannah looked at him with those green eyes that had slowly begun to hold something other than fear. Why would you risk anything for a woman you don't know? It was a question Josiah had asked himself during the long nights when he sat watching her sleep, when he had time to wonder why the thought of her leaving made his chest ache in ways he'd forgotten he could feel. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he finally said. "And some people are worth protecting." As autumn surrendered to winter, Hannah's body healed, though the wounds inside her would take far longer. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and cleaning, bringing order to a house that had known only bachelor neglect for 3 years. Her presence transformed the cabin in ways Josiah couldn't have anticipated. Curtains appeared at windows that had been bare. Wildflowers, dried and preserved, sat in a jar on the table. The smell of fresh bread replaced the emptiness that had filled these rooms since Rebecca's death. But it was the quiet moments that changed Josiah most. Evenings when they sat by the fire and she read aloud from books she'd borrowed from town. Mornings when he caught her singing while she worked, her voice hesitant at first, then growing stronger when she thought no one was listening. The way she looked at the mountains at sunset, as if seeing beauty for the first time in years. He fell in love with her so gradually that he didn't recognize what was happening until it was far too late to stop it. The problem was he was terrified to act on these feelings. Hannah had been brutalized by a man who claimed to love her. The last thing she needed was another man making claims on her heart before she was ready to give it. So Josiah kept his distance, treating her with the same careful respect he would show a wild creature that might bolt at any sudden movement. Hannah, for her part, watched this gentle giant of a man with growing wonder. She had believed, after Marcus, that she would never trust another man as long as she lived. Yet Josiah had proven that belief wrong with every patient gesture, every kind word. Every night he slept on a bedroll in the barn, without complaint, so she could have the bed and the safety of locked doors. It was January, with snow piled high against the cabin walls, when Marcus Hawthorne finally came. Hannah was alone in the house, Josiah having ridden out to bring hay to cattle stranded in a distant pasture. She heard the hoofbeats first, then the voices, and her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Marcus hadn't changed. He was still handsome, still polished, still wearing the smile that had fooled her into believing he was a good man. He walked into the cabin like he owned it, flanked by 2 men with guns on their hips. "Did you really think you could hide from me?" His voice was pleasant, conversational, and all the more terrifying for it. "I've spent considerable resources tracking you down, Hannah. You've embarrassed me in front of important people. That requires correction." Hannah stood frozen by the stove, her hand inches from the iron skillet that was her only potential weapon. "I'll never go back with you. I'm not here to take you back." Marcus removed his gloves slowly, finger by finger. "I'm here to finish what I started. No wife of mine will make a fool of me and live to tell about it." He moved toward her, and Hannah grabbed the skillet, swinging it with all her strength. Marcus caught her wrist, twisting until she cried out and dropped the pan. His fist connected with her cheek, and the familiar pain and the familiar helplessness crashed over her like a wave. But then the door exploded inward, Josiah stood in the frame, snow swirling around him like a cloak of white fury. He had heard the strange horses when returning from the pasture and had approached the cabin on foot, his rifle in his hands and his heart in his throat. "Get your hands off her." His voice was quiet, controlled, and more dangerous than any shout could have been. Marcus's men went for their guns, but Josiah was faster, dropping the first with a shot to the shoulder before either could clear leather. The second man, seeing his companion fall, raised his hands in surrender. Marcus released Hannah and stepped back, his cultivated composure cracking slightly. "This is a domestic matter. The woman is my wife, not anymore." Josiah kept his rifle trained on Marcus. "I know exactly what you are, Hawthorne. I know what you did to her. The only reason you're still breathing is because I don't want her to have to live with watching a man die. You can't keep her. I have legal rights. You have nothing." Josiah's voice cut through the cold air like a blade. "What you have is one chance to walk out of here and never come back. Take it, or I'll bury you so deep in these mountains that the wolves won't even find your bones." Marcus looked at Hannah, then at the rifle that hadn't wavered an inch, then at his wounded man bleeding on the floor. He was a bully and a coward, as most bullies are, and he recognized in Josiah's eyes the one thing he'd never seen in his own mirror, a man who would die before letting harm come to someone he loved. "This isn't over," Marcus said, but there was no conviction in the words. "Yes," Josiah replied, "it is." They left, Marcus and his wounded companion helping each other onto their horses, riding away into the snow-filled darkness. Josiah watched until they were out of sight, then set down his rifle and went to Hannah. She was trembling, holding her bruised cheek, tears streaming down her face. But when Josiah opened his arms, she walked into them without hesitation, pressing her face against his chest and sobbing with relief and release and something else. She was only beginning to understand. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you, Hannah. You're safe." She pulled back to look at his face, seeing in his eyes the same thing she was feeling in her own heart. "Josiah, He waited, patient as always, giving her the space to find her word, or to remain silent if that was what she needed. "I love you," she whispered. "I didn't think I could ever say those words again. Didn't think I could ever feel them. But I love you, Josiah Mercer. I love your kindness and your patience and your gentle hands. I love the way you talk to your horses and the way you look at the sunset. I love that you gave me back the part of myself I thought was dead forever." Josiah cupped her face in his hands, careful of the fresh bruise, and looked into those green eyes that had haunted his dreams for months. "I've loved you since the moment you opened your eyes by that creek bed. I've loved you through every step of your healing, and I'll love you through every step of whatever comes next. If you'll let me, I'll let you," she said, and when he kissed her, it was gentle, so gentle, a question rather than a demand, an offering rather than a taking. Spring came to Montana with its usual explosion of wildflowers and birdsong. Hannah planted a garden beside the cabin, and Josiah built a larger porch where they could sit together and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. They were married in May, with the entire town in attendance. Doc Patterson, who had saved Hannah's life with his medicine and Josiah's with his advice to be patient, served as a witness. The ceremony was simple, the vows sincere, and when Hannah walked down the aisle toward the man who had given her back her life, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete and utter joy. That evening, as they sat on the new porch watching the last light fade from the sky, Hannah leaned against Josiah's shoulder and sighed with contentment. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For finding me, for not leaving me, for being the man I needed when I didn't believe such men existed anymore." Josiah wrapped his arm around her and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I've been alone for a long time, Hannah. I'd convinced myself that Rebecca was my one chance at happiness, and when I lost her, I stopped looking, stopped hoping. Then I found you by that creek, and I realized that maybe the heart has more than one chance. Maybe love isn't something that runs out." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears that were, for the first time in years, tears of happiness. "What if Marcus comes back?" "He won't." Josiah had received word that Marcus Hawthorne had been arrested in Kansas City for the murder of his second wife, a woman whose family had the power and resources to ensure justice was served. But if he did, the answer would be the same as it was in January: I'll protect you with everything I have, for as long as I live. And I'll love you, Hannah said, for even longer than that. The mountains stood sentinel around them, ancient and enduring witnesses to a love story that had begun in violence and been redeemed by tenderness. The woman who had been beaten and left to die had found more than survival. She had found a home, a heart, and a future worth living for. And the cowboy who had saved her life had discovered that in doing so she had saved his in return.